Good morning, Mike.
How are you? All right, Kerry, I'll call you back. Thank you.
Hey there. I'm all right. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you. Your family's okay?
Everyone's all right. Thank you. Appreciate it. How about you?
Oh, good. Thank you.
All right. I just wanted to make sure it worked. I'm going to turn my video back off.
Bennett, I'm going to mute myself and turn the camera off, but I'll come back when you need me.
Sounds good. Thanks, Michael. Good morning, Jennifer. Can you hear me?
I can. Would you please let Meg
Everybody,
tell everybody?
Jennifer, everybody can hear you, just so you know.
Good morning. My apologies to everybody. I have an internet problem in the neighborhood that's preventing me from joining via WebEx. So my apologies to everyone, and thank you to co-chair Stanley Richards for jumping in and helping to chair the meeting.
Jennifer, Stanley's not on yet, but when he gets on, I think we will, Bennett, right, we will have a quorum and we can start.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe James Perino, did you just join?
Yes, I just turned on. Hello, everybody.
Hey, James.
Good morning. Do we have a quorum? Would you like to begin?
Jackie, can you hear us? Are you there?
Hear you just fine. Yep.
Okay. We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Yep. I'm working on that. Hold
Sounds
on.
good. Hi there.
Hello.
Hello.
So I'm just asking once again, do we have a quorum now with James?
I believe we do.
Yep.
Because we have we have 5.
Okay. Would you then like to begin?
I think we may still be waiting for CHS.
Okay,
Checking.
good deal. Sure.
Stanley, are you there?
Perhaps appreciating the order of the meeting, the agenda, we can begin. First order of business is to hear an update from the board. So perhaps we can begin, and by that time, CHS will have joined us. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, I believe CHS
Yeah.
is now joined.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I can open up the meeting then. I want to begin by welcoming everybody to this board meeting and thanking everybody for their participation. Our scheduled business will start by voting on the draft May 12, 2020 board meeting minutes, which board members have received. I cannot see, but I ask that a board member move or vote to approve the minutes.
Jackie is moving.
Wonderful.
There,
And I need another board member to second the motion.
Bobby seconds.
Thank you. Are there any edits or, concerning the minutes? Any debate concerning the minutes?
Nope. I'm on, Stanley. My apologies, everyone.
Good deal. I'm going to turn it over to you in just a second. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks for your help. May I have a vote to approve the May 12th, 2020 board meeting minutes?
Approved.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I'm in approval as well. Not hearing any nays. The board meeting minutes for May 12, 2020 are approved. We'll turn to the agenda for today's board meeting. And before we begin, let me just say a few words concerning the events of the last 2 weeks that have been spurred by the tragic and unjustified death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officers, the reckless killing of Breonna Taylor by Louisville police officers, and the unprovoked taking of the life of Ahmaud Arbery by 2 civilian men in Georgia. Every one of these losses, like the many that have preceded them for now 400 plus years in this country, many that we know about, and then probably many, many more deaths that we never did learn of. All of this is the result of systemic racism in law enforcement and criminal justice, and candidly speaking, everyday life in America for Black Americans. As members of the New York City Board of Correction, it's our responsibility to help ensure that our city jails are safe and free of rules, policies, and practices that perpetuate racism in the form of differential treatment and outcomes for persons of color, detained persons of color. And over the next several months, working with all stakeholders, we will examine our existing monitoring practices and make improvements and enhancements as needed to effectively address incidental and systemic racism in the jails. This work will be slow, it will be hard, but it is necessary. And on behalf of the board, I commit us to this work. Let's move to the order of business. We have asked the department and CHS to provide an update on the response to the COVID crisis. Once again, the board recognizes and thanks DOC and CHS staff and leadership for their collaboration, creativity, and hard work through the pandemic. I also want to recognize and thank advocates, defenders, families, and friends, people in custody, and providers for their advocacy and hard work in advocating for continued connection to community, access to care and services, and information, transparent information on the pandemic. Finally, I want to thank the board staff for their tireless work to monitor conditions in the jails, providing the public with much needed information, raising issues for DOC and CHS, and providing a space for people in custody, families, friends, advocates, and defenders to raise their concerns as the pandemic has progressed. I also want to again recognize the many DOC and CHS staff who've been working in the jails and putting their own health at risk in service to the city of New York. Many staff members, as we know, have gotten sick during this pandemic, and many have died. The board sends our condolences to the family members, the friends, and colleagues of those who died, and we continue to send our wishes for good health to all the DOC and CHS staff who are sick or have recovered from COVID-19, as well as all the people in custody who are sick and who have recovered. Before we hear from the department and CHS, Board of Correction Executive Director Meg Egan will provide an update on the board's work in the last month. Meg?
Thank you. Good morning. Before I turn to the board's COVID update, I wanted to acknowledge the death of a 38-year-old man in custody at Bellevue Hospital on May 22nd. His death was not COVID related, but we wanted to send the board's condolences to his family and friends. In the last month, the board has continued to monitor and report on the department and CHS's response to the pandemic and the general conditions in the jail. We've been working closely with the department, CHS, the defender organizations, advocates, and others to identify and address issues as they arise. We are grateful for the collaboration and partnership we've received throughout all of this, and I especially want to thank the board staff for their tireless work. As of June 1st, there were 346 people in custody who had confirmed COVID-19. This is a 12% decrease from a peak of 381 people on April 27th of 2020. Of those 346 currently in custody, 51 are currently under observation by, or as of June 1st, we're currently under observation by CHS. This is an 82% decrease from a peak of 286 under observation on April 1st. There have been 3 deaths in custody due to COVID-19. Through the hard work of many criminal justice partners, the jail population has decreased by 31% from March 16th to April 29th, a decrease of 1,725 people from 5,557 on March 16th to a low of 3,832 people on April 29th. Since April 29th, the jail population has increased slightly with a population on June 2nd of 4,014. Admissions have also increased. The week of March 31st, 2020, there were 101 people admitted to the jail. The week of May 12th, there were 261 people admitted to the jail, which was the highest point since March 16th. And the week of May 26th, there were 236 people admitted to the jail. While we have not seen a dramatic increase in jail admissions through the protests, we will continue to monitor the jail population and admissions through the pandemic and the protest. Since May, our May meeting, the board staff has continued to provide a daily public report. Beginning this week, we will be moving from a daily report to a weekly report format with the data for the previous week posted every Wednesday afternoon. As we did in May, today we are posting a file that provides each day's data in one place, and we will continue to provide that data file on a monthly basis as well. This morning we are publishing 2 reports. The first is our second report monitoring the response in the jails via the Genetec surveillance cameras. This report covers the time period from April 19th to April 30th, and again monitors social distancing, the use of PPE among staff, use of masks among people in custody, phone access and cleaning, and DOC rounding practices in cell units. Board staff observed housing areas used for confirmed COVID-19 patients, symptomatic individuals, and likely exposed but asymptomatic individuals, or otherwise known as quarantine areas. Given the dates of observation, the department was not able to implement the recommendations from our first report. And across all social distancing metrics, the findings in this report are similar to those found in the board's prior report. Board staff observed a higher percentage of staff wearing masks correctly and a slightly lower percentage of people in custody wearing masks correctly. Phone sanitation findings were similar to the prior reporting period, and board staff observed more consistent staff rounding in cell units. The department and CHS have created reasonable guidelines for people in custody and staff to follow in order to minimize the spread of COVID-19. It appears there is PPE available as necessary, and the department has made efforts to distribute written public health communication. However, board staff continue to find issues with people in custody and staff following the guidelines. Compliance with public health guidance is an issue in the jails just as it is in the communities. The jails, however, have particular barriers to compliance and particular risks considering the congregate setting and structure of jails. Board staff recommends that the department and CHS work with DOHMH to develop and implement a new public health campaign to communicate the health risks and what actions people in custody and staff can take to protect their health and the health of those around them. We also published an audit report of our review of complaints, concerns, and requests for information received by the department from March 5th when DOC began tracking COVID-related grievances through April 30th. In reviewing and presenting these findings, the board seeks to understand the issues and concerns raised by people in custody and staff in the first 2 months of the COVID-19 pandemic to identify lessons learned and to inform the COVID response going forward. Key findings include from March 5th to April 30th, DOC received a total of 5,351 grievances, which includes requests for information. 19% of those identified were COVID related. DOC staff and incarcerated individuals had similar concerns during March and April. Many needed more information or access to PPE to feel safe during the pandemic. 18% of all staff-related COVID grievances were filed by DOC staff or their families. Medical and mental health concerns about access and quality of care were the most frequent grievances received by OCGS. The department and proportion of these increased during March in the midst of the pandemic as people were concerned about exposure to COVID-19 and wanted to know how to prevent the spread of the virus. Again, I want to thank the board staff for their great work, as well as DOC, CHS, the defender organizations, advocates, people in custody, and their families for their incredible work through all of this. I will now turn it over to DOC and CHS to provide their update.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes. Hi, Ross.
Hi, Ross McDonald, CMO for CHS. So the brief update that we have is that the positive trends that we reported to you last time have continued and really deepened. So the current new cases of COVID that we're seeing really show us that we've broken the chains of transmission within the facility among patients who've been with us through the duration of this crisis. And really our attention has shifted to the new admission population, where we are continuing to see a substantial but declining number of new cases day by day. The board report reflects a lot of this with consistent declines in every metric or improvements in every metric. We understand, despite that success, that this remains an unknown situation. The policies and procedures that we've put in place have proven effective, but we have to remain vigilant for a potential next wave. And we know that at this point, the risk primarily is coming from new admissions to the jail system. And the volume of those does threaten our success. So we're in a maintenance phase, remaining vigilant, and primarily focused on new introduction of COVID from the community into the jail via new admissions.
And it's the board staff's finding that most of the majority of the complaints were medical about access and quality. Our own work in this area shows that most of over 90% of these complaints were not substantiated, but the majority of those that were substantiated were not so much about quality and access to care as anxiety about COVID, whether they were getting it, how they were getting exposed, whether they could get medicine that could treat them or prevent them from getting COVID. It was those kinds of complaints that we found to be valid. It reflects, I think, certainly among our patient population, in a more concentrated way than the rest of the city or the world, a high level of anxiety about COVID, getting it, how to protect yourself from it, what it meant if you had it, if you had symptoms or not, and what those meant. And we took all of those very seriously, including increasing direct access for patients to call us, whether for mental health issues or physical health issues, directly from their housing areas to us.
I have some questions. Is CA to prevent the population from increasing? I know that earlier in the epidemic, you were spectacularly involved in identifying persons at risk and assisting MOCJ and the defense bar and the attorney generals and the judiciary in releasing those patients. So, what the numbers of 50-year-olds are going up right now. The number of people who are medically vulnerable are going up right now. What are you doing to keep the population of people at the greatest risk of severe illness off the island?
So thank you, Dr. Cohen. It's Patsy again. As you well know, we have worked on compassionate release and alternatives to detention way before COVID happened. COVID simply gave us a greater opportunity to accelerate that work, and also created a greater awareness among the partners who make those decisions of the utility and the urgency of making those decisions. We continue to present lists, we continue to review our patient population, we continue to advocate with defense attorneys, district attorneys, and courts. We continue to give lists of people who should be considered. I think it's a struggle, and to the extent that the board can use its voice to encourage change at that level at the city level, in terms of who's arrests and admissions to jail and alternatives to incarceration, that would certainly help. We are certainly doing our part.
Well, we certainly want to support your leadership. Can you identify the number of people who have been released in the past month due to this kind of activity?
You would have to get that from MOCJ.
So you don't have that information. I have some questions about testing. at the last, I believe that you said you were going to be testing new admissions. We've been trying to ask. We have tried to ask you directly prior to this meeting to help us understand your testing of new admissions, because when we count them, you report the number of tests that are done each day, and in our analysis, they don't correspond with the number of new admissions that are being reported each day. So are you currently testing all new admissions to the facility, and do you have any numbers to give to us on that? Sorry, I
We
didn't
are
hear.
universally, yeah, we are universally offering testing to all new admissions. People do have the right to refuse, but so far the positivity rate among new admissions has hovered between about 5% and 6%.
But when the numbers that you give
People
to
are
us,
also, new admissions are also, we work with the Department of Correction so that new admissions are cohorted. So it's not just testing that obviously with this disease, testing is just one weapon in the armament.
so are you testing people when they come into Manhattan House?
I'm sorry, your question again?
Admitted to and then is sent to Manhattan House, which I understand is the new admission area generally, with some exceptions. Do they get tested? And what day do they get tested when they come in?
They're being offered universal testing on intake in Manhattan.
And how many are, when you say that, how many are not accepting? They're being offered. I mean, what percentage of people are not getting tested?
So there is a refusal rate associated with the nasopharyngeal swab, which is an unpleasant test, and some patients don't wish to engage in that when they're asymptomatic, as all of these patients are by definition. As Dr. Yang pointed out, there are housing procedures consistent with their acceptance of the test. So we're able to contain the introduction of COVID into the facility without mandating testing, which we would not do.
Percentage are not getting the test.
Sorry, we didn't get that, Bobby.
If 100 people enter MDC, how many get the test? How many don't get the test?
The number varies. We don't keep the records of it.
So I think it's a shifting target, Bobby. I don't have an exact number. We're constantly refining our workflows as well. Initially, we were not doing it as part of the intake admission. And when we go back to reach people, the refusal rates seem to be higher. So more recently, we've integrated it directly into the intake admission. So I don't have an exact number for you, and I think that's a number that's shifting over time.
I mean, it didn't shift yesterday, Ross. It was a certain number yesterday, testing, right? I mean, every day some people accept, some people don't accept, right? It doesn't shift.
I'm not getting your question, Bobby. It's technically.
There are so many people in, or maybe it was people came into the jail since you announced at the council meeting that you were going to be testing new admissions. How many of those people have been tested? How many people were not tested?
I don't have that number handy. It is.
I've been asking you this question periodically, Ross. I don't understand why you won't provide us with this piece of information.
Because we don't have it, Bobby.
We've asked for it for weeks.
That number. What we are focusing on is trying to get people to agree to get tested. That's one issue. The other parts of it is.
So what percentage of people are getting tested?
Testing is one point in time. Dr. Cohen, I'm just trying to answer you. Testing shows one point in time, gives people a good feeling at one point in time. It's not the end all and be all. Cohorted housing and watching for symptoms and doing all the other things that we're looking at doing also helps inform when somebody can leave their new admission housing.
Okay. And the new admission housing is how long? How many days do people spend in new admission housing?
14 days.
It's 14 days.
And are they
depending
tested
on
on,
testing algorithms.
are they tested on release from there?
Not currently. We've not seen downstream transmission from what we're currently doing. We, as you know, Bobby, collaborate weekly with systems around the country. And as we're seeing shifting epidemiology, we're reevaluating these decisions every week. One thing I would also point out is that the experience around the country is that when you offer widespread testing to asymptomatic individuals, the refusal rate is quite high. Some systems are seeing in excess of 50%. We're not seeing that. And we don't see the refusal as a barrier to preventing downstream transmission from new admissions, provided the volume does not overwhelm our systems.
And how long does it take for you to get your test results right now?
I'm sorry, Bobby.
Thank you.
I was wondering how the testing you're using, how long from the time of test to results?
It's been somewhat variable as the volume in the city changes. So we had gotten down to a 24-hour turnaround time. And more recently, we've seen that increase again, a problem that we're troubleshooting with our laboratory partners.
Okay, and then I have one other question, which is a question that Stanley asked at the last meeting, which was he was interested in, and I know the whole board is interested in your quality analysis of the phone call system that you had. There appeared to be problems that we heard about the last time, and we specifically asked for some for a report on how that is working. Could you give that to us?
If you're talking about sick call triage, that was an initiative as part of our re-envisioning, as you remember well, that even preceded COVID, has nothing to do with COVID. It is supplementary, does not replace. We're happy to brief the board separately or next month if you want a formal presentation of that. I apologize, I did not realize that you wanted, the agenda said COVID update, not it re-envisioning of CHS. We can certainly talk to you about re-envisioning as we did in February.
Yeah, that would be helpful, Patsy, if we can get an update on how it's going.
Sure, we'll do that.
And I want to just follow up with a question. First, I want to say thank you for your work. I know you are and your team is working really hard to try to figure this out. And I just want to put on the record and say thank you to you and to DOC. Could you reflect and give us, like, what are the lessons learned in how CHS responded to COVID-19? What are those lessons learned that will be important to make sure that we implement in the new, smaller borough-based system? Have you had time to reflect on that, or are you still in sort of response mode?
Maybe why don't you go first, and I'll.
So that's a great question, Stanley, and we have begun discussions on that question. I think it's, I don't have an easy answer though. I think that this experience absolutely should prompt us to reevaluate certain elements of design. I think we saw the importance of ventilation, not necessarily in specific medical isolation areas per se, but across an entire facility in an indoor space where people are going to be living in a conjugate way. I think that one of the design elements that was already in place was a more normalized living environment around rooms, private rooms, hopefully moving away from calling them cells. And that design is supported by what we experienced, where people can keep social distancing because they have their own space and as much as possible analogous to like a small apartment. So those are some things that jump to mind, but I think there's a lot of discussion that should be had in light of what we've experienced.
Yeah, and I would just add that I mean, our CHS really did do a phenomenal job with and we were sort of the focal point of everybody's attention and scrutiny in the heart of the global pandemic center, right? And the fact that with all the scrutiny and all the sort of backseat driving, nobody has said that we didn't do something or we did something wrong. People, nobody has done that. And so the tsunami hit us before testing was even available. And so I think the team was extraordinarily creative and skillful and smart about using whatever tools we had. The partnership that we had already with the Department of Correction is astronomically tighter and unified in purpose and operation and mission. And I see that only continuing to get stronger. In terms of our workflows, we were able to capitalize on things that we've already been pioneers on, including, the whole model of therapeutic units, where people, because of a clinical condition, were housed together, created a whole new designation of housing that reflects that kind of a thing, where people are placed because of where they are in a disease spectrum or where their clinical needs are. We learned the utility of that. We knew that. We were able to really capitalize on our technology, everything from telephonic access for patients directly, and that was done in concert in partnership with the Department of Correction, to really using our telehealth capabilities. So that allowed us to augment, the fact that we had no diminution at all in access and utilization in our medical, our nursing, our mental health services during this period of time, despite the fact that, patient to patient and patient to provider contact needed to be handled very carefully to avoid transmission. The fact that we had no reduction and in fact some enhancement in clinical services and access, whether it was physical or mental health, both of which were more focused because everybody was anxious and scared. And I think that the other piece is that, and this has been in planning also, our reentry and our discharge planning work has been critical, not only as we were able to get more people released, but just that people could be safely released, both for the person who was getting released and had a place to go and to get care, and that the community wasn't scared that we were creating a pandemic by releasing more people. And that again was done with the partnership of the Department of Correction. And we would expect to continue that sort of processing as well going forward. I don't know if that.
Yeah, I thank you, because I think there is an opportunity here for us to really reflect on what was done well and what could we learn from this. There was a number of variances requested for how people should either access medical or process be modified because of COVID. And I think we ought to be looking at what are the things that we should continue to do post-COVID, and what are the lessons learned from this that allow CHS and DOC to be nimble and effective as you just described. So I think there is at some point an opportunity for us to really deep dive in what went well, what do we need to change that could continue to enhance both the collaborative relationship between CHS and DOC, and at the end of the day, provide health and care to those who are in custody. And finally, really establish, I think we established a protocol that CHS could be pivotal in diverting people from detention. And I'd like to see if we could somehow build that into the way that we operate going forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Dr. McDonald. Can you hear me? Hey, just I agree with what's being said. You have done a tremendous job. You know, the data and the loss of life numbers, while each one was tragic, is amazing to me. Amazing to me. And it has to be said that your partnership with the men and women of the Department of Corrections is extraordinary. This is the glass is like 3/4 full to me. It's terrific stuff that you've accomplished. The executive director in her report indicated that the detainees were not wearing masks as religiously as the men and women of the Department of Corrections. Is that because of lack of supplies, or is that just self decisions?
The department should answer that. The Department of Correction provides masks for people who are in detention. I don't know if.
Are we?
Yeah, no, we're not muted. Chief Jennings is going to respond.
So hi, good morning. This is Chief Jennings. So I think that from the beginning, when we had our first positive case, we went out to do the education for people in custody as well as issue masks. We've done multiple teletypes. We've done multiple posters, our end of day reports. We have gone out and we've spoken. We've added in, and I'm giving out personal protection equipment at a minimum of 3 times a week to replenish the housing areas, which we've come up with a threshold where they're replenished. And we're also providing personal protection equipment to staff, as well as all of the ancillary areas and units. And that's happening a minimum at 3 times a week. And so we've been doing that all along. So I don't know where the confusion is. I myself look at it. I'm the one who approves it every other day. And even during the weekend, we opened up the Emergency Operations Center to handle this in the middle of our surge, in which we've now closed it. However, I have kept the storehouse open 7 days a week just to meet the demands of any needs that may arise. So
yeah, and Member Regan, this is Brenda Cook, Chief of Staff. You know, in my time in the facilities, I regularly am interacting with people in custody with respect to their access and availability of masks, because I regularly see you know, people in custody in their day rooms, in their housing units without a mask. And I'm almost uniformly informed that they have a mask, that they know where to get a new mask if they want to replace their mask. And the response is, and others here with me who have been spending our time in the jails throughout this pandemic can explain as well, we're routinely told that people feel comfortable in the housing units with the people with whom they live. And they wear the mask when they leave the house. They wear the mask when they go to the clinic. They wear the mask when they go to recreation. They wear the mask when they go to a service. But when they're in the house, it's a place where they feel comfortable. They're comfortable with the people that they're living with, and by and large, they choose on their own not to wear a mask. It's not a matter of supplies, access, knowledge, understanding, or availability. It's a personal decision about the comfort of those that they live with.
Okay, thank you.
DOC, do you want to present, if there are no other questions for CHS, DOC, do you want to go ahead and give your update?
Sure. So this is Patricia Feeney, Deputy Commissioner of Quality Assurance and Integrity. The department continues to stress enhanced sanitation, and in so doing, the environmental health unit continues to do training for our staff members and our work details. Through June 2nd, we have trained 522 staff members and 385 work detail members from January 1st. And from March 1st, all of that training was done on our enhanced sanitation protocols, which luckily are quite similar to what we normally do. As I've explained in the past, the only difference that we have is a reapplication of the Virex to ensure that the surface remains wet for 10 minutes. We have been continuing with our audit process, our 3-tier process that we described the previous 2 months. And we are finding that our policies and procedures are working as CHS described. The numbers of cases have dramatically decreased. The comfort level of both the staff and the incarcerated people has certainly improved. As Chief of Staff Cook said, when I tour, I asked to see their masks if they told me they have them, and they do. They understand, both staff and individuals in our custody, where to get additional masks. So I think that our educational campaign has also been quite successful.
Okay. Hi, this is Chief Jennings again. I just want to talk several things. We are continuing to work with our care unit with the chaplains to go out and make hospital calls as well as home visits. As of June 1st, we've lost 11 staff members, 1 captain, 5 officers, and 5 non-uniform staff members. Our staff, our wellness staff continues to monitor and check in with BOC staff. Since March 1st, 295 staff were followed up on who were either home sick or hospitalized. As far as housing, as a result of the release program and through efforts with the judges, district attorneys, defenders, MOCJ, CHS, and state docs, the jail population has reduced. Our current census is 3,976 persons in custody. We opened up MDC to be the asymptomatic facility, which that has been successful. Prior to COVID actually hitting, we had closed down 50% of MDC. And now as a result of this new housing area plan, we have every housing area which is currently open at MDC. On a daily basis, we're monitoring their census. And then after approximately 14 days or more, if we find that their housing areas are reaching more than 50% capacity, we have been monitoring and transferring persons to VCBC after consulting with CHS, so that we're still keeping more persons off island. As far as the week of May 25th to June 1st, we've also reduced the number of quarantine housing units by 71% from 38 to 11. We did over or conducted 7,290 televisits for keeping people in touch. And that's through the dates of April 1st through May 31st. We've provided over 2,238,000 free phone calls. We facilitated 2,961 video conferencing between people in custody and the courts. We have installed additional units in our attorney council visits to do those teleconferencing. We've also added some additional groups to our visit process. We currently have 84 televisit devices and facilities. And we're also looking to increase that as well, to add additional units to housing areas, as well as additional units for court purposes to each of the housing units. We are continuing to screen staff coming into the facility where they're at a battery of questions, and they are having their temperatures taken. We've also expanded that, and we have been doing testing for the antivirus at several facilities for staff. And so I'll let Judy speak to the DC Bill speak to the programming piece.
Good morning. This is DC Beal. The tablets, I think, are the topic we wanted an update on. We've delivered tablets to all facilities except OCC and BCBC, which will take place this week. We're systematically assigning the tablets to inmates, one house at a time. And we're establishing a very tight tracking system so that we can monitor this program moving forward. We've also worked with APDS to provide monitoring of messages between the students, the people who are in school, and their teachers for internal and external stakeholders. So we're looking forward to doing that with our education providers.
So a question, this is Stanley. A question on the visits. How long are the visits, and have we seen an expansion in terms of the number of people, number of detained people who are accessing visits as a result of tele-visiting, or is the number just...
Stanley, we have seen an increase. We are looking to expand this. So even when we go back to what will be a norm, this will be a program that we're looking to continue. We started working on this about 2 years ago with Securus, where we're looking to add these units to the housing area so that families will be able to register and to be able to use this unit even on days in the housing area where there are no visits, because we know how important that communication is. And we're also looking to expand the kiosks in the housing units for televisiting, court processing, as well as telehealth. And that was something that we offered 2 years ago in a meeting when we sat on one of those co-chairs for the group to talk about expanding this communication so that with the attorneys, so that they would not even have to leave their offices from a secure location. When Skype first came out, and we had been pushing this for the last 2 years to get this. So we're definitely looking at expanding this even thereafter.
Great, great. And a question, I think, for me is, how are the officers feeling about the department's response about their health and safety? And how are they doing? How are officers doing in this in this pandemic?
I think that you know, we at one time we had over 3,000 staff members out sick, and most of our staff are now back. I think that, you know, they know again where to get the personal protection equipment. I mean, there are days when I'm looking at Gentech and I'm calling the house to say, hey, where's your mask? And they're taken out of reserve. It's the same with the people in custody. They know. They say, well, Chief Janice, I have, you know, and because we've done such a great job with putting the vulnerable population together, like in NIC and in housing areas that CHS had identified persons, and that we've done such a really good job with people living together healthy. I think that, you know, most of the fear, because it is just a matter of the unknown, you know, we've done so many different things just trying to get people informed. And I think that we're at a better place when, you know, as this starts to die down more, I think that we will get back together because we did several roundtables prior to say, hey, what did we learn? You know, what did we improve upon? And then, you know, God is, you know, with us, and we get a surge in all of the things that we have done and put in place. It's going to work, you know, to our advantage because, you know, there was a lot of thought put into it. There were plans that had to change. I think another thing with us having an alternative location for people who were sick, we had upwards of 12, 13 housing areas open at EMTC, and we're only down count today at EMTC is only 29, and half of that is we created a workhouse for anyone who was cleared. We got people to volunteer to pay. We provided them with the equipment. We put together our housing units, and it went night and day. I mean, those guys have done a tremendous job with taking care of EMTC, with the painting, with the cleaning. We added dedicated EHO supervisors to that facility, and a lot of things that we've done, they've worked. And so I think, you know, when we talk about people not wearing, I think the biggest thing is that they felt safe because people were not getting sick in the housing units. And they were living together for long periods of time. And we were not moving people around and transferring like we had done. And again, prior to COVID, we did a big consolidation plan, and we have AMKC, which is our largest facility. They're at about 50% closed. There was a lot of thought that went into and a lot of hard work in collaboration with CHS and all of our other stakeholders in getting this done.
Stanley, can you hear me?
Yeah, Jackie, yes. She has a hand up.
I have a question.
Yes.
I also. Okay. My question is there anything new that you have planned to decrease the rate of infection among your staff? It's a very dramatic number that of the number of people who become infected. Do you have any ideas or plans with yourself, with the Department of Health, in terms of with correctional health services to protect people going forward, because there is likely to be a large amount of virus and in the surrounding, and in Nassau and Suffolk County and in Westchester and in all over the place coming this fall. So what are you doing? What would you like to do to decrease new infections among your people? And I was wondering if you think there's any. I mean, I must say that the union was present in their approach to this in ways that many other more powerful forces weren't. In terms of their concerns about masking, is there any way that and the men and women, the people who supervisors within the jails, can work together to try to decrease the next wave of infections, which is likely to occur? I mean, every day people come in and out. Every day people are admitted and discharged. And it's not over. So I do think that a collaborative process, if possible, should be attempted and could make a difference.
Thanks, Bobby. This is Brenda Cook again. So with respect to our efforts to keep staff safe, I think as Ross and Patsy mentioned earlier, coronavirus was within our community and our facilities, both staff and people in custody. Before we were really aware of it, and certainly before testing was available. And that's where we saw as a community, just like the community of New York City and New York State and beyond saw a very significant and early spike in infection amongst both staff and the people in custody. And so it is by adhering to the practices that have enabled us to flatten that curve and virtually eliminate it from both the population of people in custody and amongst our staff. It's strict adherence to those practices that have worked, that are going to keep us safe and healthy for the duration and keep us nimble for the presentment of introduced spread as people in the city begin to go back to work. I think the vectors of risk, just like we were discussing earlier, Ross and Patsy, the vectors of risk of right now they're seeing it's new admissions at a 5 to 6% rate of infection. It's the risks that are coming into our system as well. You mentioned our staff go home and come back to work every day, and that's true. And so our staff have been educated, and our staff are really strongly encouraged for their health and safety, and those that they live with and those that they come into contact with, to maintain the social distancing, the PPE, the sanitation, the hand washing, all of the protocols that as new workers were talking about. That's what's going to keep our staff safe as well. I would say, with respect to the rates of positivity amongst our staff, in the month of May, we saw very few new positive cases reported from our staff. And in fact, the positive cases by and large that were reported during the month of May were those staff that had actually been out sick since April or even March, and we're just reporting back to us for the first time with positive test results.
In nursing, just want to follow up. In nursing homes, there is a movement to have staff and patients tested with the notion that as long as there's an epidemic going on within the facility, that there should be testing of all the groups that are exposed, and there should be staff. Have you considered that?
We're not doing that at this time, and I actually would defer to Dr. McDonald as to whether or not, in fact, he thinks we have an epidemic at present, anywhere in our facility, let alone a particular area of our facility. Because I actually think that, based on my partnership with CHS, that we in fact have a very minimal presence and a really robust early identification of anyone who in fact is presenting. And as Ross mentioned, it's not that we are seeing a downstream infection of the population in custody amongst the population in custody. They're identifying those that may be coming into custody as carrying coronavirus at the time they enter.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just agree that, I think
Let me get Jack.
Throughout this response, our strategies have had to remain fluid based on the situation and the epidemiology, and right now what we're seeing does not warrant an intervention like that.
Jack.
Hi, yeah. I'd like to go back to Chief Jennings, and thank you very much, Chief Jennings, for your leadership and for the specifics you provided on the visitation issues. I'd like you to speak a little bit more to the department's current thinking around visitation relating to a specific population, and that's the population of parents in custody with very young children. The limits on visitation fall particularly hard on such parents, and taking all of the measures that DOC and CHS and others are taking to keep the population of the jails healthy. I'd like to hear what the current thinking is around how to maximize opportunities, particularly for parents of very young children, to have quality visits with those babies and children.
Hi, Jackie. So I think that we have always realized that the communication that people have with their families has been important. We had looked at previously Rose and Singer to be one because we find that the women in custody get the least amount of visits. So we talked about opening up visitations to them, and then we moved to doing the museum visitation so that we can make sure that they keep those connections. And prior to COVID hitting, we had also toured a museum, and we were ready to start up visitation with our male population. But unfortunately, COVID came along and we couldn't do that for that population. So I think, with us looking at different opportunities in which we can do visits, so that even when we return back to contact visits, to still keep this in conjunction to is one of the options. And again, we're also looking to put these units in the housing units. Okay. So we're also looking at putting these additional units in the housing areas to increase that. And as we go forward, one of the things that we liked when we went and we looked at Norway and Amsterdam was allowing people, to have the capability to doing things on the tablets also. And even e-texting so that people will be able to send like little bursts of events to their loved ones. So, we've been looking at this technology. A lot of it has a lot to do with the fact that our facilities are older, and it's a lot. I'm thankful for our IT and facility maintenance for all of the hard work that they've been doing to just help us get to this point with adding Wi-Fi and things of that sort.
A final question, Commissioner. What is your thinking around the relaunch, the reopening of the city, and what is DOC thinking about next steps?
So we are following the guidance that we're being given by the city agencies who are making those plans, and we will adjust our practices according to what they're telling us.
Hi, Stanley, this is Brenda. By and large, our agency, we've just over 11,000 staff, and almost all of those staff, save about 800 people, have been coming to work, reporting to work throughout the pandemic and doing their jobs. And putting themselves, in their health at risk and in harm's way in order to maintain the continuity of services and to keep others safe. And so I just, we have been in many ways seen a dramatic change, to many of our operations in response to the pandemic and in our successful bid to keep those in our care and ourselves safe. But in many respects, our staff have been stalwarts in carrying out their duties and responsibilities almost at a rate of 100%. So.
Great, thank you. All right, if there's no other questions, we're gonna move into the DOC plan for summer heat. Meg?
Thank you. On Friday, June 5th, DOC released their plan for summer heat. This is the plan for managing housing and care for people in custody who are sensitive to heat, which is important every year, certainly, but takes on a particular importance given the COVID-19 pandemic. This plan takes into account recommendations made by the board last summer after the last summer's heat emergency and subsequent report. In this year's report, the department indicated that it currently operates 2 facilities with centralized cooling systems. Over the past year, the department has installed air conditioning to housing units, resulting in an additional 145 beds with air conditioning. They've also installed additional fans and will make pedestal fans available in the housing areas. As of May 31st, the majority of the people in custody, 58% are housed in air-conditioned housing units. As of June 2nd, there are 804 heat-sensitive individuals in the department's custody. Nearly 600 heat-sensitive individuals are housed in heat-sensitive housing. Of the remaining individuals, 162 refused to be transferred to their current housing area, from their current housing area to heat-sensitive housing, and signed refusal forms in the presence of a clinician. An additional 43 individuals received an approved housing override for serious security or safety concerns, and the few remaining, about 1% of the total, are pending transfer to heat-sensitive housing. On May 29th, the department issued a teletype instructing all staff of temperature monitoring procedures for the summer season, the department will post their heat plan on the web along with a Q&A document. The department isn't going to formally present their plan, but they are available for questions from the board. Are there any questions from board members? You're muted. Bobby, you're muted.
Can you unmute me? Because I can't. No. I don't. Can you unmute me?
You're good. Go ahead.
Could the department give us the timeline for when there will be units for persons living in the New York City Department of Correction?
Bobby, when we have new facilities, all of the facilities will have entirely modern climate control, ventilation, and other state-of-the-art systems. Presently, we're in the process of adding some additional air conditioning to upper level housing units ourselves with our facility maintenance division at some buildings in RBC that should be finished in the next few weeks and months. But we don't have the capability with our physical plants to add central heating and cooling to our present facilities.
I just want to comment on that. I think that is consistent with why this country is riding right now. People should have air conditioning. It is a predictable, horrific moment on Rikers Island that comes almost every summer, where people are placed at risk. People have died all over this country, in jails and prisons from heat exposure. It's a soluble problem. It does not require pumps, and it is a I don't, you have lots of priorities. You have a huge responsibility, and but one of them should be to have air conditioning in the summer. I mean, you did add some air conditioning this year, but why didn't you add all the air conditioning that's needed? Why should people in ESH, have limited access to showers and not all have air conditioning? Why would that be a prioritization? I mean, I hope that the building project that everything is up in the air in this city right now, but we do know that the summer comes every year, and I hope Boulevard is air conditioned, and I hope the bubbles, where your staff works are air conditioned, and I want everyone to have air conditioned. And I don't know how this meeting is going to run, so I'm just going to make a couple of more brief comments at this point, because the department is up. I just hope that we recognize, because of this moment, that we have made some really wrong turns, for the past 400 years in this country, and that we change it, and that we recognize the original sin of slavery, and that in places like Rikers Island, which are designed to control and manipulate and crush Black bodies, that we stop. And we stop putting people into solitary, and we stop shackling people to themselves or to desks. We don't create a system where you can either be in a dark cell with small openings, where you have to kneel down to talk to someone, or otherwise you can have your legs shackled together and then attached to a metal. I hope we can get quickly to a place where the Nunez report looks different. The 9th Nunez report is worse than the 8th Nunez report, is worse than the 7th Nunez report, is worse than the 6th Nunez report. They all describe increased levels of violence. Not just violence, but intentional, unnecessary use of excessive force and a failure to do anything about it. That's why the streets of New York and Philadelphia and Minneapolis and Los Angeles and London. So I link this to the air conditioning, because who would not provide air conditioning to people in New York City in the summer who are confined and can't, and can get out maybe for an hour a day? Who would do that? We do that. And it's time to stop. So the next time I ask you, I hope you don't say when the new borough built facility. I mean, I understand that, and that's respectful, but I don't know if the new borough built facilities are going to happen right now. I don't know what this mayor's priorities are going to be right now, and it's going to be complicated. Is he going to have schools? Is he going to have new jails? Is he going to have housing? People, maybe they only need to build 3 jails or 2 jails. Rather than all of this, make sure that the population comes down, but we cannot separate our responsibility in terms of the control of a group which is over 50. I mean, there are not a lot of white people in ESH. More than 90% of the population are people of color in the jail. So we are it. We are the instrument. It goes from the police, and they dump them into corrections, and our job is to make it as moderate as possible. And sometimes we think we're doing a good job. Sometimes you think we're doing a good job. Sometimes we don't do a good job. Sometimes we're not doing a good job. But everybody should have the temperature down in the summer, and it's an embarrassment, and it's an attack on the people who live there not to provide it. So I'm going to ask the question at the next meeting, and I really hope the department can tell us that every housing area will be air conditioned next summer. It's doable. You just have to probably go on the internet and find a person or an organization which provides air conditioning. City list.
And thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for saying that, Bobby. And there is a fundamental question, and I agree. There's a fundamental question, and we know that every year summer's coming. We know that there's a heat-related issue, and it really is compounded, Bobby, when you talk about Black and brown people who are detained. When you look at the Department of Corrections workforce, I don't know what percentage of them, but the majority of them look like me. And so not only do we have an institution that is bricks and steel and holds heat, and we know that the heat is coming, we have a subset of a population that doesn't have the ability to leave their housing area and go into an air-conditioned room. We have the officers who have to stay in some of those hot, work in some of those hot dorms, but they have the ability to peel out every once in a while and to go get some access to AC. But I tell you, last year when I walked out toward in the middle of summer, I seen officers drenched with sweat right next to people who are detained. So when we talk about how we treat people and how we ought to be operating, that is a real fundamental question I think the department needs to answer. And it's about AC, but it's about, we know it's coming, how do we do it? And let's get it done so we don't have to keep revisiting this. Any other comments from board members?
Hi.
And BOC's response.
Hi, Sam. The commissioner would like to comment. Okay.
Commissioner, thank you.
So, a couple of things. Thank you for acknowledging that our staff have to be in those same conditions every day. We know summer is coming every year in New York City, and it seems like it comes earlier and earlier each year. I too would like for every place that we live and work in to be air conditioned. However, we have financial and structural limitations with all of that. We have worked very hard over the past couple of years with our capital improvement plans to put air conditioning where we can. And as we are closing buildings, we are repurposing the air conditioning infrastructure to those places where we can put air conditioning. In some of the buildings, structurally, it just cannot be done because of how the building was constructed when it was constructed. I think you'll find the same types of things in public housing areas where you just can't put central air conditioning in old buildings not designed for that. We do the best we can to mitigate those very hot areas with ice and lighter clothing and more fans and access to showers. We know it's not ideal. I tour, the chief tours, everybody who's sitting in this room tours so that we can be in those locations to see for ourselves what's going on. So I agree with you. I wish we had air conditioning everywhere. And as the chief of staff mentioned, when we do get those new buildings, it will be designed for that purpose. It's not an excuse, it's just our reality right now. And because of our restrictions with capital funding and the ULURP being the way it is now, it will be difficult to get funding because we don't have a 5-year use after the completion of the project. So that's a conundrum that we're in right now. With regard to Bobby's statement, or implication that the 9th Nunes report, or what's the conditions at Rikers, is the cause of the global unrest, I take offense to that. It's inflammatory, it's false, and it's shaming and blaming for something that is not resting with one particular place in this country. And to infer that the police dump people on corrections. It's not the police that bring people to our door, it's the court system. And if we are going to solve this problem, we have to work together. We have to stop the pointing fingers. We have to stop the shaming and the blaming and sit down and listen to each other and find a way forward. We are where we are. But to say that the staff here at Rikers, New York City Department of Corrections, is the cause for what's going on in this city, I strongly deny that and will not accept those inflammatory comments.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think one of the things we do need to do, and I agree with you, I think we need to work together. And you're right, it's not one system versus another system. I think there are systemic problems in every system that touches our lives that we need to look at, and we need to examine where there are barriers and where there are institutional barriers based on race, gender, et cetera, et cetera. So I agree. I think we need to work together. And one place I think to start that work is around reducing the number of people who are in, and we've seen that happen during COVID-19. Continue to work together to do that. And then close the facilities that you said that are just structurally, there's nothing we can do to provide AC. Reducing the number of facilities we have like that allows us to, if we have to detain someone, detain them in the facilities that have the capacity to provide AC and to provide some comfort to those detained and those that work there. And while we build the new, smaller system, that is going to be a while. So I think there's some work that we can do together, and I agree. We got to get out of the blaming, but we do have to get into self-reflection and look at what we can do from our lens, from our viewpoint, to change the system. So thank you. Any other comments from board members? Okay. So thank you, everybody. We're going to go into public comment. Bennett, I don't have the public comment list.
Jackie, are we having a report on the PDRB?
Meg?
Stanley, the list should be in your email. I will send it to you again right now.
Okay.
Stanley, this is James Carino. I just got a quick. Can I think out loud for a second? We have an 800-bed. I know the department built an 800-bed addition to Rose M. Singer. I'm just asking the department, are they utilizing that space? And being it's kind of new, is that space air conditioned? Would that be an option? Maybe just to alleviate. I mean, 800 beds is almost maybe 1/3 of the population right now. The population is so down. Just a thought.
Mm.
I guess that's a Chief Jennings question.
James, this is Brenda. So yeah, so we presently, the Rose and Singer Center houses our female population, and so we are using air conditioning housing for the female population. Obviously, our female population is quite low. I think it's around 160 individuals, as I saw the census this morning, and the Rose M. Singer Center is a jail that is far larger than, and so that's the population that's housed there. Air conditioning able to the their house there.
Is there a way of like separating that addition and just utilizing that as its own facility? I mean, just because there's no way you're going to put air conditioning in these old buildings. I was sweating in 1989, and nothing has changed. I used to hate summers on Rikers Island because I knew that's when the violence was up and that's when it was going to be very dangerous. I mean, I just remember that vividly. I'm just wondering if like that 800, even though Rose M. Singer is a female facility, half the facility is kind of old, probably doesn't even have air conditioning. I know that new addition might. Is there a way of separating that and utilizing that as a separate facility? I mean, just a thought.
Yeah, it's something that we've thought of as our female population over the last 2 years in particular has dropped significantly. But in order to have services for additional populations at that facility, significant structural modifications would need to be made, and we don't have at present, as the commissioner mentioned, that is not part of a capital projects plan, given for us to be off Rikers by 2026.
Okay. Jim, anything else?
No, that's good. Thanks, Dan.
Okay. So I have the participant list, everybody who signed up to speak. I'm going to call the person's name. When you hear your name, please raise your hand on the WebEx screen. It's located underneath the participants. If you don't have that, click on the person silhouette at the bottom of your screen, and the participant list should show up, and you can raise your hand. Once you raise your hand, we will unmute you, and you can begin to turn on your video, and we'll unmute you, and you can begin to share your comments. You will have 3 minutes to share your comments, and I will let you know when your 3 minutes are up. So first we have Kayla Simpson. Kayla, your hand is up. So perfect. You may begin, Kayla.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Kayla Simpson. I'm a staff attorney at the Prisoners' Rights Project of the Legal Aid Society. And to be honest with you, I had comments prepared primarily addressing COVID-19 and the heat emergency, but based on some of the comments made by the department moments ago about Nunez, I feel it is incumbent upon us as plaintiff class in Nunez to address that sentiment. The commissioner is wrong when she suggests any doubt that the reason that people are in the streets is anything other than the failure to take accountability and to impose accountability on bad actors in these systems that systemically oppress and cause violence to Black and brown people. That is precisely what the Nunez report shows over and over and over again. And she is right to say that it is not unique to the Department of Correction in New York City, but the inability to accept responsibility, to point the finger back at ourselves and to say, how can we actually fix this, is exactly why people are taking to the streets. The Department of Correction is out of compliance with the 4 most essential components of the consent judgment that events reform. That is implementing the new use of force policy, thoroughly and objectively and timely investigating use of force misconduct, imposing discipline, and addressing the violence that occurs in the young adult population. For anyone to come into this forum and blame shift after just reading that report is exactly why we need a Nunez monitor and exactly why people are in the streets. It is, and I speak as a person who has white privilege, so I can't imagine how that would land on people who don't have white privilege, but it's coming in here, and it applies to COVID-19 and the heat emergency as well. And talking about policy, here are policies that we are attempting to do to address these problems. But what people in those facilities need, and I include staff in this in terms of COVID-19 and the heat wave, is for policy to be practiced. And over again, policy is not practiced. They can release a heat plan to you, they can talk about their sanitation protocols, but your board found in terms of cleaning that the phones are not being cleaned. When there are public health emergencies like a pandemic, like a heat emergency, the ability to actually translate policy into practice that benefits and minimizes the vast harm to the Black and brown people in DOC facilities, the ability to actually hold bad actors accountable in the system is everything. And that is precisely why there is a board of correction to provide oversight, and we really ask you to step up your vigilance in this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. Next up is Jordan Rosenthal. Jordan, your hand is up. You should be unmuted.
That was totally
And
improv.
thank you.
You can go.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Sandy. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me and allowing me to speak. My name is Jordan Rosenthal, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement for the Women's Community Justice Association and the Beyond Rosie's 2020 campaign. As part of my work, I have been diligently tracking the COVID daily reports that have gone out from the BOC, and I have noticed some inconsistencies that I would like to bring to the board's attention. Specifically, the daily data report has stopped announcing how many pregnant women are on Rikers Island, and that has stopped on May 20th. This is really concerning because we do know that there are pregnant women, and we want to know if they are being exposed to COVID, which brings me to the other problem. Starting on June 1st, the BOC reported that less than 10 women have been likely exposed but asymptomatic. And this may be an error or some type of issue because on May 30th, there were 118 women who were likely exposed but asymptomatic. This huge jump makes me kind of leery of the data. And I'm just kind of really want an answer or some type of information from the BOC as to why they've stopped reporting about pregnant and what why this jump has happened of likely exposed but asymptomatic. Thank you, and I relinquish my time.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is Jennifer Parrish. Jennifer, I see her.
Good morning.
You can begin, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Sunday, June 7th was the 1-year anniversary of Layleen Polanco's tragic death in a restrictive housing unit at Rikers Island. Following her death, there was an outcry from the public and politicians to prevent future deaths in isolation and end the solitary confinement of people in DOC custody. Yet 1 year later, nothing has changed in the city jails. In 2019, 1,925 people were subjected to solitary confinement. That is almost 2,000 people who experienced the trauma and mental and physical pain caused by isolation. In the last year, you have heard from so many people who have lived through that experience. They have come to these meetings and bared their souls. They have shared the damage that solitary caused them while incarcerated and how that traumatic experience continues to haunt them after release. Yet that has not spurred you to act. It took years for the board to release its proposed rules regarding restrictive housing, and it has now been 6 months since the hearings on those rules. You seem to feel no urgency to address the harmful conditions of the city jails. The board's actions and failure to act have consequences for thousands of people's lives. How many more people will have to suffer the harms of solitary confinement and even lose their lives before the board takes a stand? We urge you to vote at the July meeting, end solitary confinement, and adopt rules consistent with the blueprint for ending solitary confinement in the city jails. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. Next up is Julia Solomon. Julia Solomon. There she is.
Okay. Hi.
Yes, you can go.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Julia Solomons. I am a social worker with Defenders and a member of the Jails Action Coalition. As many have spoken about, today's meeting takes place during a political moment in our country where real change feels imperative. The amount of people speaking out against institutional racism is powerful, and it is critical that the board listen not only to the public represented in these meetings, but also to those in the streets chanting about the pain and suffering that Black people have experienced in this country since its inception. We appreciate the board's efforts in compiling and releasing their recent report on COVID-19 in the jail. Particularly notable, the report confirms that the current jail population is 90% people of color, 55% of which are Black people. Anyone impacted by the criminal legal system knows that systemic racism is deeply ingrained in this system, and these numbers prove that. And while the board can't erase racism from our city jails, they can work to create systems within the jails that promote equity and reduce the opportunity for racial bias. As noted, 1 year ago, Leilene Polanco died in restrictive housing, and it prompted a wave of momentum and interest from the board in creating such a system, a restrictive housing rule to balance the authority of DOC with the rights of people. And yet here we are, and many board meetings, conversations, and a lot of advocacy later, and nothing has changed. In fact, with the onset of COVID, there has been even less oversight and systemic checks and balances in the jails. Our clients' court dates are few and far between and occur virtually. Their access to their legal team and their families is extremely limited, and any semblance of due process with regard to disciplinary proceedings has all but disappeared. The board made a commitment to put policies in place to govern the use of restrictive housing, and several board members made commitments to end the use of solitary altogether, and yet a full year has gone by and there has been no justice for Leilene or the many other lives lost to this torturous practice. Every day, more people are being tortured in New York City, disproportionately people of color. The delay is truly shameful, and we call on the board to act immediately and implement the blueprint to end solitary confinement presented to you by the Jails Action Coalition and the Halt Solitary campaign. We also continue to express how crucial it is to allow access to counsel in any implemented disciplinary system. Currently, we are witnessing a national call to action. At every level, those with power choosing not to act are in effect complicit in the systemic injustice happening everywhere. As Chair Jones-Austin correctly stated in opening this meeting, and Dr. Cohen elaborated on further, it is the board's responsibility to combat systemic racism in our city jails, and as such, there is no more time for delays in restrictive housing rulemaking. Continuing to allow primarily Black and other people of color to languish and die in solitary confinement despite the horror stories that impacted people have shared publicly over the past year is not only unacceptable, it is violence in and of itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next is Kimberly McKenzie.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Kimberly.
Thank you. On behalf of the TGNCNB Task Force and the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, I'm the Director of Outreach and Community Engagement. We stand in solidarity with the targeted senseless murders of those lives taken by police brutality. As the task force consists of community advocates, organizers, attorneys, and the Department of Corrections to produce an annual report that ensures the safety of TGNCNB populations in custody by reviewing these policy and regulations. We still stand in solidarity with the senseless death of Leilene Polanco at Rikers. Last year, during the month of Pride, Leilene, an Afro-Latina trans woman, was placed in solitary with knowledge that she had chronic seizures and died in solidarity due to being unattended. So as a Black trans woman, I am offended at the shame that we shame and we blame, and we continue to not hold each other accountable and attending, and we continue not to end the torture of solitary confinement. The board has ignored the political cry of communities' efforts to hold these systems accountable. Obviously, institutional racism, barriers, and race and gender, we have to implement this by honoring policies that support these folks. While I understand that 50% of housing has been air conditioned, we should be focusing on placing people in places that have these systems in place. And if the buildings aren't designed to keep these people safe, then they should not be placed in these institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next is Minister Dr. Victoria, Ms. V. I see her. Ms. V?
You can hear me? Sorry, I had
Yes,
to
we can hear you.
the city council meeting. I'm trying to do both. Okay, so let me address.
We can hear you.
Okay, let me address some things with y'all today. I think the board should pay attention to the Nunez report because, as Dr. Cohen brought up the attention, this is the worst one yet. And as so often, yes, we try to praise people when they do the right thing. And so often this board has said to the Board of Corrections and to the Department of Corrections and CHS how wonderful of a job they are doing, but we still have to remember to hold them accountable, whether they agree with the accountability or not. We have to be stern and implement certain things because the Nunez report is there more than we are. And they are clear on nothing is getting better, it's getting worse. And so today it was brought up the number of cases have decreased or the number of tests given a decrease. So my question is, the number of cases of COVID is decreasing amongst the population, or is it the number of tests actually being given amongst the population decreasing? CHS stated when we go back to take tests, the number of people that refuse is higher. And I agree with Dr. Cohen. Why aren't we given that number of refusals? CHS was very clear at the last meeting that they were testing all new admissions. So that tells me you've had a month, even if you wasn't collecting data before you spoke on the record about it, you had a month to start collecting that data. So there's no reason you're now showing up a month later with no data. That's unacceptable. And people get paid too much money to continue to come to these meetings and not produce the work that they're supposed to be doing for the people of New York City. Second, I'd like to address that Patsy stated to Dr. Coleman's question about access, and she wanted to speak on and not necessarily being the majority of about quality to care, but around the higher level of anxieties around access to care or about COVID in general. That might be true. And given I worked in the mental health field and nursing field, I totally understand that. And having speaking to people directly on records, even up to last night, I totally understand that. But let's be clear, Patsy. Let's be very clear. Many people are still saying behind the walls that they are not having access to even reach medical staff through the phones. I even had DOC and CHS questioned by city council members about the access to calling and making appointments with medical staff, and them telling me that they had a recording as if they was calling out to the public to listen to when they're calling medical staff, and at times they're not even able to make an appointment because their time runs out. And DLC was very clear with their response to city council that there is no time allotted when you're calling medical staff. It's ran differently. That's just a disclaimer that Securus use all the time when you use the phones. And that my question was, is if people are hearing those same recordings, are they actually having their recordings recorded when they're speaking to medical staff? And no one had an exact answer on that. So I want the board to find out, one, are people time or the people minutes actually being used to make medical calls? Because I know I was part of the Zero Profits Coalition when we got medical all calls free for people in New York City Department of Corrections, but that was not supposed to be anything according to their access to medical. So let's.
Thank you, Ms. B.
And lastly, Lastly, I want to say policy and DLC does have to do with NYPD, because Tim Farrell, who used to be part of classification, and I believe he still is part of that, even though he's right underneath the commissioner now, often brought up in meetings that they use classification according to what NYPD told them on the streets. So when the commissioner says NYPD has nothing to do with DLC, let's be clear, it very well does. Have a blessed day.
Thank you, Ms. B. Next is Alex Terestino. My apologies for the pronunciation on your last name. Alex, I see you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for hosting the hearing today. My name is Alex Tereshchenkova, and I'm one of the organizers of the Emergency Release Fund, a grassroots bail fund for LGBTQ individuals in New York City and COVID-19 bailout community response. First, I want to acknowledge what's happening in the current environment and the history of Rikers. Rikers was named after Richard Riker, who presided over the main criminal court in New York City in the 1800s. He used his authority in the position to send blacks to slavery as part of what abolitionists called the Kidnapping Club. In accordance with the Fugitive Slave Act, members of the club would bring a black person before Riker, who would quickly issue a certificate of removal before the accused had a chance to testify that he was actually free. That is not much different from what's happening currently at Rikers Island, with individuals being held pre-trial. 88% of the current population of Rikers is there pre-trial, which went up from 75% in March 22. That means over 1,000 people are being held indefinitely on cash bail, totaling over $293 million. Over 90% of these people are Black. We believe that cash bail is an unjust system that punishes people in poverty with jail time and should be ended, and is unfairly being used even during COVID to keep medically vulnerable and marginalized communities in unsafe conditions in detention. Since the mayor and governor refused to release people during this pandemic, especially medically vulnerable individuals, we are using cash to get people out of jails fast. Since March, we have paid over $1.1 million in bail to release over 140 people. Please include those in your count, the count of people who've gone down in your in jails. In economy experiences at Rikers, individuals we work with consistently report a blatant disregard of public health best practices or even basic standards of hygiene. The communal phone, which might be touched by hundreds of people in a given day, was only cleaned 3 times out of the 45 times the Board of Corrections observed it. Buckets of water were positioned next to the phones to assist with self-cleaning, but instead posing additional health risks. While the board observed a low percentage of incarcerated persons at Rikers wearing masks, we heard the PPE is limited, with incarcerated persons wearing the same masks for days and weeks. We've also heard that incarcerated persons had a make-your-own mask workshop, guys as art therapy. The incarcerated people spoke to, move on to the next part. People are not being tested upon leaving Rikers and are expected to go into quarantine before going into the community. However, there is now a shortage of post-release support services all around the city and housing through the city. Mock J hotels have reported a limited capacity issue and a shortage of supplies. We hope you consider pressuring the city to expand non-DHS emergency housing support for people leaving the Rikers as well. The department should be doing everything in its power to reduce the population, which would include efficiently and quickly processing bail payments so that people being bailed out could be released expeditiously. However, we have seen bail payments take multiple days and even up to 50 hours in clear violation of local law 123. Especially during curfew last week, as the mayor announced that everything was shut down between 8 p.m. and 5 p.m., we couldn't physically post bail, which the majority of bail you can only post at the bail windows. In addition, our bank is only open 3 hours a day in one branch in the entire city, so we only have like 8 hours that we can post the bails at. That means people can't get out. One person who was medically
Thank you, Alex.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I would encourage people, if you have written testimony, to please submit the written testimony. Written testimony will become part of the record. And so while you might not get a chance to finish your entire statement, by submitting your testimony, it will become part of the record, as will the version of your testimony. So thank you all. Next up is Herbert Murray. All right, Herbert.
Oh, okay. You got me? You hear me?
Yes.
How y'all doing? I am so ecstatic about this committee, this commission to eradicate solitary confinement in New York City. My name is Herbert Murray. When I was 21 years old, I was arrested for a murder I didn't commit. But after 2 years, 2 trials, I was found guilty and sentenced to 15 years to life. Subsequently, I did 29 years. Between Brooklyn House and Detention and Rikers Island in upstate New York, I did approximately 10 years in solitary confinement. The BOC has a long history of placing people in solitary confinement, even though it has caused harm in many ways. I'm getting a little emotional. Yes, it has caused harm in many ways. Physically, psychologically, emotionally, and it caused people to even kill themselves. Crazy, because of the torture, being isolated, having nowhere to go, being stuck in that cell, not even equipped for a dog, for a cat, for nobody. And subsequently, people kill themselves. No form of isolation can promote good behavior. I can't emphasize that enough. It can't. It hurts. It isolates. And they underfeed us. We come out 20, 30 pounds lighter in an environment that is confined to hurt Black and brown people. It has to stop. And as everybody indicated, it has a long history. Bacchus was a slaveholder, and they still holding us as slave in 2020. And we sitting around, and I'm hearing the people that represent the DOC, and they sound like it's okay. It's okay. And they saying they doing this and they doing that, and in essence, they not really doing nothing but collecting a paycheck. I'm gonna close with this. It's the same thing going on. I did mine 40 years ago, and it is still happening today, especially when we talked about that female, Polico. 5 days she was in solitary confinement, and the pressure subsequently made her kill herself. That's torture, man. Enough is enough. We are in 2020. We are in the time of reflection and appreciation. We have to understand that we are in a new time now. We can't continue like that. We can't condone it. By condoning it or not saying nothing, you are promoting it. You are promoting it, consciously promoting it. And I thank you for listening to me, and I pray to God that we do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Herbert. Thank you for sharing your experience and showing us all the humanity that rests in you and rests in all of us. And we ought to value it. Thank you. Next up is Sarita. Sarita.
Yes. Good morning, everyone.
Yes,
Can you hear
there
me?
you go.
Thank
Good
you.
morning.
Thank you, everyone. I am testifying today on behalf of Just Leadership USA and the Close Rikers campaign, and as a member of the jails. Than it has been in more than 70 years. And we are grateful to the board for your role in pushing to release people in response to COVID-19. But the nearly 4,000 people still held in city jails are subjected to inhumane conditions and horrific abuse at the hands of the Department of Corrections. That is this board's job to deal with. Recently, the Nunes Independent Monitor released its 9th report at a time when people across the city, nation, and country are witnessing and reacting to video evidence of police aggression and escalation on a daily basis. Incarcerated people and their loved ones know, and this report confirms, that those same acts of aggression, escalation, and brutality are carried out by the New York City Department of Correction on a daily basis, but in secrecy behind bars. Today, I want to ask the board how you are planning to address the findings of the most recent Nunes report. The report describes that the department is in non-compliance with the 4 essential areas of the agreement. The report describes staff as often hyper-confrontational and the department's leadership as failing to implement meaningful reforms of accountability for staff misconduct. The report also notes that the use of force rate is now more than double what it was at the start of the monitoring period, and the backlog of internal investigations for the use of force has grown to over 8,600 incidents. In short, it describes the department unable or unwilling to protect the basic human rights of people in its custody and to meet the minimum standards the board has set. These findings are not only deeply troubling, but are further evidence of the structural violence this city carries out against people of color who comprise 90% of the people in New York City jails. 2 immediate questions for this board. How will the board address the backlog of over 8,600 pending investigations of staff misconduct? And when will the board meet with department leadership and the monitor to review videos of uses of force by correction officers, which the independent monitor identified as inappropriate, but which the department identified as appropriate through their internal reviews? In the January board meeting, Dr. Cohen requested the opportunity for this joint review, and Commissioner Brand offered to bring this idea up to the monitor and get back to the board. We are seeing that all over this country, electeds and government administrators are being held accountable to use their power to actively oppose systemic racism and the manifestations of it. We call on this board to find the courage to immediately use every tool in your power to end the Department of Corrections' reign of terror. It will require each of you to have the courage to break old patterns, because those patterns have resulted in countless trauma, injury, and loss of lives at the hands of the Department of Corrections for decades. Thank you for your work. Continue to work with you to protect the lives of people in the department's custody.
Thank you, Sarita. Thank you. Next up is Mike Kennard. Kenned. Mike Kenned. Mike, I don't see Mike here.
No, you unmuted me. It's Mick Kincaid.
Oh, hey.
Hi. Thank you so much. I'm speaking today simply as an individual and as a member of the task force to address issues of facing TGNC NBI individuals. We've already heard so many people have brought up her name that Ms. Polanco's, the anniversary of her death was June 7th. We also just passed the anniversary of the death of Khalid Browder. It's very important to us to remember that both folks passed away either in solitary or because of the effects of solitary. Ms. Polanco was a young, medically vulnerable Black and Latinx transgender woman. At the 1-year anniversary of her death, it was announced that there would be no criminal charges pursued by the Bronx DA. That was a horrific insult and a but fortunately, the board and the department can act. You can end the use of solitary confinement in the city jails now. In December, I testified before the board. I got written testimony from multiple transgender women currently held by the city. All of them were Black or Latinx. They were all expressing their experiences with restrictive housing, either solitary confinement or protective custody, other kinds of reduced solitary confinement. These women shared what it was like to be housed in solitary because of their gender identity, because they were afraid as they were housed with men, or because they fended off attacks due to their being housed with men. But we know that even housing people correctly, housing transgender women as women, it doesn't solve the horror of solitary. Ms. Polanco was housed as a woman, and yet she still died due to her vulnerability and how solitary increases medical and mental health exacerbations. The board has heard these recommendations. It's been 6 months since those hearings, and yet there's been no action. It's upsetting to me to think that the department's response was that this is not a time for finger pointing, when actually this is exactly what that time is for. This is a time for us to all look internally and say, what can I do better? What can I do to be the change that needs to happen right now? And ending solitary confinement is exactly what we can do right now. The department has that as an option. The board has that as an option. It is exactly what should be happening. It's absurd to state that Rikers is not a part of the over 400 long years of anti-Blackness in this country, or to somehow take that personally or as an offense. It's a fact. It doesn't mean that anyone who works there personally invests in that. It is simply a fact. We have to be able to, all of us, look at our institutions that we work in and name these things. It's also important to note that racism involves the policing of gender expression and identity, what's considered as an acceptable way to be a woman or a man, or that one must be a woman or a man. We need to only look at the act of women's prisons to see that. It's a clear mission when women's prisons began. The jails in New York City are not unique, but there are places where we can make that change right now by ending solitary confinement and by taking the issues raised by TGNC and NBI people very seriously. In early April, members of the task force released a letter calling upon the release of all medically vulnerable and socially vulnerable people in the city jails. DOC did not respond to that letter. DOC did not acknowledge that letter. And as the violence rises, which we know from the Nunez report, and as we also all know happens in the summertime, I'm going to be very quick, I'm sorry. As that violence rises, people who are targeted for violence will also be at risk for COVID. I wish that the violence alone was sufficient, but we now also know that COVID will be, people will be more at risk for that.
Thank you.
And it's important that the task force not be delayed because of COVID. It's actually more urgent now than ever. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Kelly Grace Price. I see you, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you for holding this hearing. Can you hear me, Stanley?
Yes, we can hear you, Kelly.
Great. So I'm Kelly Grace Price. I've been testifying in front of the Board of Corrections since 2014. The main narrative thrust of my testimony, of course, has been the implementation Prison Rape Elimination Act on Rikers Island and in our city jails. I've also raised numerous instances within BOC data and DOC data, and I want to thank the BOC for always being very responsive to the task to it. Although I have to say, regarding PREA, I know that there's a lot going on with the DOC and the BOC and COVID this year, but the ball has completely been dropped on PREA. And I would ask the board to please turn its attention to implementing the rule that was passed in 2016 and still remains over 80% unimplemented as soon as possible. The Downstate Coalition wrote a letter in February to On Pass to You, but we put it on hold because of the pandemic. But I think the board is aware that the latest report, the semi-annual report released by the DOC as per local law passed by City Council in late 2018, insufficient. The responses outlined in that report are vastly insufficient to the demands of the local law itself. I would just like to point out a couple things very quickly that came out in this last report. I'm not quite sure when the last 6-month biannual report was published. The DOC just sort of puts things on its website without a date on it. But this one was published within the last 60 days. And if someone could let me know exactly when it was posted, it would be great. The lack of transparency in when data is published is very obfuscative to our attempts to calculate the total numbers of sexual abuse and harassment complaints on the island and in our city jails. Pursuant to Local Law 21 of 2019, codified by Section 9-156 of the NYC Administrative Code, the department is required to report incidents of sexual abuse biannually. But the latest report has all kinds of obfuscations that still do not allow us to understand the full picture of what's going on with rape, sexual assault, and sexual violence, sexual harassment in our city jails. First off, the reporting only covers incidents or complaints that last longer than 90 days in the investigative life cycle. So we don't even know the full and true number of complaints. We only know the number of complaints that last longer than 90 days. And I'm really appealing to the BOC, to the chair, to the vice chair, and to the new director, Ms. Egan, to please, baseline, we need a total number of complaints within each 6-month period. This should be a minimum baseline, and we shouldn't have to beg for this. For over a year now, I've been begging for this. And also, the DOC is pretending that it cannot give us durations of investigations. In the report, they claim that the information cannot be aggregated, but that's not true. In the past, the DOC has provided the length of investigations of sexual assault aggregated by, I believe, 30-day increments, but now they're pretending that they cannot provide that information. I suspect that that has something to do with the fact that the backlog was just resolved in this latest batch of reporting, and they do not want dispositive, long duration cycles for their investigations being published. But we really need some transparency. Please, can someone give us a hand up here? Also, is that my 3 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. As always, I will turn in my written testimony. But I want to point out that one really big issue is that the DOC is not letting us know how many investigations are being done by the NYC Department of Investigations versus the DOC Department of Investigations. And there's a lot of monkey business in the explanation for why they're not providing that data. But that's another bright line issue, and I'll highlight that in my testimony. Thank you for letting me go over 30 seconds, and thank you for holding this hearing.
Thank you. Thank you. And our last speaker is Amanda Marcel. Amanda. I don't see Amanda. I don't see Amanda.
I don't think Amanda's on the call.
Okay. Okay, so that concludes our public comment period. I'd like to just offer a closing comment, and I offer this to the board as well. Any board members, if you want to make any closing comments. And my comment is this. What we have seen over the last number of weeks has really hit home to me as a Black man in America, that we have lived and we have learned to live with the pain of our suffering in silence. We have learned to accept and to justify in our own way, in our own existence. We have learned to accept the mistreatment of Black people. And now is a time, and I heard a number of speakers call on this, now is the time to not look for what is perfect and good about how we do our work and the work that we do, but it's how we can each look inward to make a critical improvement in how we see people and how we interact with people and how the system we are charged with maintaining and upholding and fixing interacts with Black and brown people. And it's not time for work around the edges. It's time for going at the heart of it. It's time to go at the heart of it. And so for the advocates that spoke today, I hear your urgency, I feel your pain, and I feel your call to action. I feel your call to action. And to our partners in DOC and CHS, this is not about finger pointing. This is not about looking at all that you do that's wrong. But it is a moment for us to collectively reflect on what we can do to make the system better. So I end this meeting feeling hopeful, as I have been feeling over the last week or so. And my hope is embedded in the desire and energy of people around the world to not give up and no longer live and suffer in silence, but to speak out in whatever voice you have, be it protest, be it public comment, be it voting, but to speak out. The only one who would do that are those who are willing to fight to make a difference. And I know all of you, our partners, our friends, our family, our allies, what you have showed me over the last couple of weeks, that we are all still willing to fight. So I want to open it up to any board members that might have some last words or reflections.
Thank you, Stanley.
So I'll close this meeting with the hope of the future, locking arms with each of you, that we will make a difference. We will make a difference. So have a blessed day, everybody. Have a blessed day. The next board meeting is July 14th. Details regarding that meeting will be announced in the coming week. So the next meeting is July 14th. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, Stanley.